Actually got dark here yesterday a couple of times. All right, Kevin, kind of encouraging. Okay, my name's Kevin Michels, and we're at Water Start Center. We're going to talk about getting the most production out of your fruit trees. If you'll allow me a little bit of expanse on that, the class was directed at trees, and we grow a lot of good fruit up here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your figs and your bramble and some other things that can get fruit out. The easiest way for me to start, this is a lot of information. It's going to be kind of fire hose-esque, where I'm just going to start from the roots and go up. And some of the planting techniques that will affect the root production are really important, and watering and stuff like that. So we're going to start at the root ball, and we're going to work our way all the way up to the ends of the plants and the roots. And the fruit that you're going to get. The soil that we have, the decomposed granite, and depending on where you're at, it's just in different levels of decomposition. Some of it is still quarter minus, rough, big sand. Underneath that, it breaks down a little bit more, and you end up with these veins of clay because of the calcium and the other minerals, and it continuing to break down into a really fine dust. You hit a pan of solid that if you can break through that, then you'll actually get back to sand. Some of you, at one of the properties that I had out off of base of Mingus, I put in 12 fruit trees, not a grub one, not a worm, nothing. There's no organic material in there, but I pulled out just a handful of stones because it was all of that decomposed granite. It wasn't like the rocky stuff off of Copper Basin or out off of Williamson Valley. But it's all granite, and what it needs is acid and organic material. What you don't want to do is add too much mulch to the hole, or too much potting soil. Our potting soil doubles as a raised bed mix, and depending on your soil, we advocate just doing 1/3 of the mulch to 2/3 of the native soil. The plant itself will be grown in 100% mulch. And if you make the hole too perfect, that sounds right and it seems good because it's that perfect growing medium is what we want to put it in. When in fact you want those minerals and you want that sand to you're just changing the molecular structure enough for your roots to go out into it without hitting a wall. And if it's too perfect, you end up with some dry rot and some other issues where you're trying to keep this ball of mulch moist enough and let it dry out. So you need that, you just basically need the sand. The acid that is created, nice little wind this morning. The acid that's created when the mulch is breaking down is what causes the minerals and the nutrients decomposed granite to and the plant can then take it up. So I personally will use our mulch, and then I will add humic acid, which is what this is, and I'll go over that kind of towards the end as far as amendments are concerned. Composition is going to be one plant, whatever it is in here, fruit producing plant, at the same level that it is grown at. Okay, there is structural change in the meristematic material, stuff that's underneath the bark that grows, that carries the moisture and the nutrients up and down the plant from the ground, from the roots. And the product that is roots can handle air and sun better than the bark from the stalk can handle moisture that's in the soil. The pathogens that are in the soil, the living organisms that are in the soil will cause some rot at the base if you bury it too deep. Now, one little medium caveat there is there's nothing wrong with some light airy mulch or some leaves or something like that for a winter little blanket that you're going to part. But as far as soil is concerned, You don't want the plant to sink down in there. The way that you accomplish that is you don't dig your hole any deeper than it is being grown. Many of our trees are going to be container grown. This tree is 7 years old and it's ready to produce fruit, but that's what we're selling, the stuff that is good for the area and ready to produce fruit. You want to make your hole wider. Think volume, not dimensions, not measurable dimensions. So 2 or 3 times bigger than the bucket. So if you've got a 7-gallon bucket, essentially you want it to carry 14 or 20 gallons worth of product. And if you, one of my methods to getting the hole the right size is I will take the plant out of the bucket and I will use the bucket to measure my hole. Easy for me to say, right? I'll use the bucket to measure my hole and not be carrying the tree back and forth, right? So I'll take the tree out, set it off to the side, use this to measure my hole. And that I just drop it in there, make it a little wider, drop it in there, make it a little deeper. If I go too deep because I'm enthusiastic with my primar, then I use rock, not extra soil, because you don't want to be watering it and again having it settle. You know, you walk up and you see the well and the whole thing sinks down like that. That's problematic. When you see the way that you can notice some of these issues, one of them is water. When you have a windstorm and you see trees just snapped off at the ground level, that yes, that is some wind, which we have, but it's also the Latin term for the fungus that eats away, kills the tree. It's called, it translates as tree killer. My Latin's terrible, so I'm not going to try it. But that comes from buried it too deep. When you don't water deeply enough, which I'll get to now, your roots will stay spread out, and you'll see the tree that's blown over, and you've got the splay of roots sticking up in the air because he's trying to go for water. That's a common one in yards where you have a lawn, and then you have your trees stuff on a drip system that maybe the lawn is on also, and you're spraying the lawn every day, and this guy's getting 2 gallons every day, and his roots are just staying really shallow. Even if this is your bucket, it's a 15-gallon bucket for your tree, if you water frequently, you're going to keep that top part wet, and you're not going to get down to the bottom where the roots were. And that's the difference between surviving and thriving. And for your fruit to get bigger and to produce well, the tree to produce well, you've got to go deep. So if you can, if you're going to have them on a drip system, try and get your trees on a separate valve so that you can put enough water on them instead of, and the measure for year 1 is the size of the bucket. So if this is a 10 or 15 gallon bucket, I want to put 10 or 15 gallons of water on it at one time in a half an hour period, an hour and a half period, or something like that. So, and you're going to do that every 5 to 7 days, depending on your soil type, how it holds and stuff like that. And there's some tricks on checking your moisture, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So you're going to, you measure your hole properly, set the tree in it. And this is a very simple and important element, especially if you're using your fruit trees as landscape. Or if you're doing a graft like our 5-in-1 apples or something like that. On those, when you have multiple fruit on one tree, you pick the weaker of the limbs, the smaller of them, and you want to turn the tree so that limb gets the most sunshine. But all of your trees have a shape that is theirs, and you only get one chance to make that turn, and that is before you start adding the soil. So he's out of the bucket, you got your hole dug, you stand him in there, get up off your knees, or get your spouse to go out there and walk around and say, yeah, give him a quarter turn. You only get one chance to do that. If you don't do that, then you're pruning to the space afterwards. And if you're doing a row, like a little orchard or something like that, that becomes important. And for reasons I'll explain to you in a second. I like to, if I'm not just out in the field, if I'm doing this in my yard, I'll have a blanket or a towel or something, or a piece of drop cloth that I'll have my soil excavated onto so it's easy to put back in. I can, one scoop of native soil, one shovelful to one scoop of mulch to 2 scoops of native soil. That's your mix. And pour it in there. I will add, depending on, again, on the soil, I'll add my fertilizer and or some of the humic acid while I'm planting it. The humic acid you can put in the hole if you have a little bit of that pan or if you're in a clay area. But I will layer it in with my mulch soil combo. I'll get it as wet as I can with the hose. And without an attachment, I take my hose, turn it up really loud, and I can run it in that void between the bucket, the original bucket, which again is 100% mulch. That's why you're erroring on the side of the natives. Tapping it out, and it'll look like it's boiling. Air pockets. And unless you have a really solid root ball, you really don't need to mess with that. You don't need to cut the roots unless you got some great big ones and they're really wrapped around there. This step is going to hydroponically, or you're going to blow apart the root ball by running that in there. And when that settles, you'll have some puncture scars, and that you can throw some more native soil or some more mulch in to cover those holes up. That's when I'm going to come back with some root and grow. It looks like Hershey syrup, but it is a root food. It's not a hormone. It's a carbohydrate for the roots. I do this on the day I plant it, and then every 2 weeks. But there's really only 3 applications when you first put something in the ground. If I have anything left in this, or I have a tree or shrub that looks like it's in a little bit of decline, I'll pour the leftover on this, because oftentimes it's just a root issue that could be plaguing the tree that's in the yard. So I feed roots frequently. That's where the fruit gets all of its nutrients. It's many of these issues, problems that you will have, start with the roots. So now we've got it planted, and we've got a watering schedule, the size of the bucket, once every 5 to 7 days. You're going to put that much on it. On deep holes, I use a piece of rebar. The skinniest one, it's easier to get in the ground. If I think my watering isn't right and the tree is telling me so by droopy leaves or whatever, then I'm taking this piece of rebar and I'm running it in the ground just outside the root ball and pulling it out, and I'm looking at that and I can see, oh yeah, the top part is moist, that's dusty in the bottom, or it's muddy in the bottom and it stinks, so I've already set it up for rot. Maybe it's sitting in some clay, but you got to do a little bit of forensics along the way to measure how you're watering and how you're feeding. Your food for your fruit production and for your roots is the same. It's the center number on your fertilizers. So you have nitrogen, phosphate, phosphorus, and then your potash. The easy way to remember that is up, down, and all around. The up nitrogen is all your new growth. The root food is, the side effect for it is flowers. All of this stuff in here that is in full bloom, the technique is called pushing. So in the nursery, that in the grow houses, even in line where the trees are, they're dilute fertilizer all the time. As they're growing, they're moving them up in pots. 7 years, they get moved to where they can actually bring them to the send them out. So we'll buy them. They'll increase the phosphate. They will push the plant into bloom mode. And then once it starts to bloom, they send them to us because they sell better if they got flowers on them, right? Or fruit. And that, you take that, if you're just buying a flowering plant that sits inside, and you keep feeding it weak phosphate every 2 weeks or so, and that'll keep it looking like it did when you bought it. On your trees, for fruit production, or any of these, this is universal. This planting and feeding and watering is pretty universal. In the fall, you want to put just phosphate on the roots. And if you put this granular and water it in, then you're doing two things. The only time any plant, the root system can work for itself is during the fall. The rest of the time, it's supporting the tree, it's supporting a function. It's bringing water in, it's bringing nutrients up to the growth, all that stuff. But you feed it phosphate in the fall, the roots they're not taking a nap, they're just working themselves. The beauty about it is the phosphate's flowering food, and your peaches, your apples, your bramble, all that's now has that residing in its branches, waiting for the first warm, and your bloom will be better, and you'll be healthier. Most of your diseases and stuff like that, and I'm talking rots and other things, not grubs and bugs, but most of your diseases are going to be better fought off if the tree is as healthy as possible. And that's not chasing a problem, that's being ahead of it and making sure your watering's right and your feeding schedule's right. Our fertilizer is set up to add acid to the soil on a regular basis. There's cottonseed casings and other things that break down. The byproduct is more acid. That acid is going to help you with blow apart the clay, but also make the minerals that are in your decomposed granite more available to the plant. A little aside on that, one of the reasons that gypsum and sulfur work in clay is because as they break down, they become acid. And that separates, that blows apart that molecular structure, that now dust, which was your decomposed granite, and the minerals or the pH and the calciums and stuff like that lock it up and it becomes clay, and later that hard pan. That blows apart that molecular structure. The acid does. And so I just go straight for acid. When once a year, I'm taking a bag of this because the pH in our water and the pH in our soil isn't conducive to perfect fruit and vegetable or just ornamental growth. So I buy a bag of this once a year and just empty it. It doesn't do me any good. If two ways it doesn't work. If I leave it here or if I take it home and leave and don't open it, just get it out of the bag. It's a soil amendment. It's not a fertilizer. You can put it down when you fertilize. It's not going to burn anything, but you'll look like you had fertilized. If you don't do it with the fertilizer, it's an amazing product. It helps balance out what we have. So
what time of the year do you put that down?
Well, it kind of goes along the same time as when is the best time to plant a tree? Right now or 10 years ago? So when you buy it, you go home and empty it. It doesn't make a bit of difference. Now is a great time to start your fertilizing programs because supposedly we're going to go into some rain, and that helps. And rain's balance is okay on the leaves. The hose, only a few times a year do I recommend hosing a tree down with the water out of your well, or the water out of your house. It's just some of the conifers now that are going through their stress where they put out their candles or their new growth, and those are hardening up, and you'll see some dead stuff in the center of the plant. It's great to go in there before the rains start and put a high pressure hose on and knock all those brown things off, and the tree will get the moisture from the bark and from its new needles. It'll enjoy that. It's just not a habit that you want to get into because of the alkalinity of the soil and the calciums that are in the water that comes out of the well.
I wondered that acid, even if you don't have fruit trees, you put it on any of your bushes.
Lawn, everything. Anything that you've planted or somebody else.
Water right away.
Yep.
We have a water softener system, and we water all our trees and everything with that water. I know it has some salt in it. Is that pretty bad for anything. We haven't seen it had any problem with it.
Well, it's just a buildup. When you see a clay pot that is sun-dried clay and not kiln, you'll see the weeping of the white. That's salt and calcium. And yeah, it builds up, and that's one of the reasons why the chemical fertilizers we don't advocate because they're salt-based. And ironically, your fertilizers will be Scott's and Miracle-Gro, stuff like that. They're not built for our pH, but they have high salt content. And if you just throttle up the salt, it becomes a weed killer. So that's you can make weed killer with salt and vinegar. Yes.
You talked about the other areas in DJ play and stuff. What about I look up in the forest.
Uh-huh.
Now, all the pine needles drop, blah, blah, blah. Does that not add acid? Is there acid in the soil?
Well, the pine needles are okay, but the blah, blah, blah is really bad. That's like, I don't know, if you can rake that out,
No,
set it on
pure
fire.
and have a little
I'm
good,
just-
that's no
yeah.
good.
No, that's an interesting question because the antelope and buffalo and the forest fires, there's not 1,000 years or 300 years of decomposed forest on our ground. It's hard to find a 200 or 300-year-old tree up here. All of that is relatively new. The turpentine product that's in the pine needles keeps things from growing underneath the tree. It's a self-preservation mechanism that allows them to capture all the moisture and all the minerals without having to share, because nothing likes to grow in fresh pine needles. So you can rake it up and put it in a mulch bin, but after a couple of years, you can use it. But planting directly underneath that without separating some of it is not good. And it's not enough to matter. You can go in and break that stuff apart and put a blanket of mulch on top. That's the other way to get mulch into the soil, is to not dig it up and till it in. Just lay a layer on it while you're trying to decide what to do with that spot. And as it rains or you water it, it'll decompose and filter into the soil. The worms will come and your microbial activity will come. You can cheat a little bit if you're going to use wood chips. I don't advocate putting wood chips out directly on top of stuff because they haven't decomposed enough, and what the decomposition cycle will pull all the nitrogen out of the soil and any plants that are around it so that it can get hot enough and cook. But it will release that again, but in the process, it can hurt things. So what you can throw nitrogen directly on your wood chip pile, or you find a spot over there and you're tired of the weeds and you don't know what you're going to plant, but it'll be a year from now. Go get 4 inches of free wood chips and just cover the area and throw some granular fertilizer on it. And by the time you get around to it, that'll be now being usable mulch. It'll be thick enough to where no light will get to it. You kill a bunch of weeds. As it's burning, it will actually decompose the weeds and their seeds. It's that hot.
So what happens if you have that weed cloth every year underneath the rocks? How does all this work into it?
Well, most of that stuff that is there, as long as it's not old enough to have the black plastic, it still has some perspiration to it. So when you pull it back, sometimes you'll find a network of angel hair roots underneath it, waiting for the plants to sitting up there to grab moisture. That's an indication that you haven't been deep watering, but also plants will just do that out of survival mode. Your fertilizers and your water will all seep through that. That's why the cloth is being used now. So if you want to get to the soil, you've got to pull it back. That's just the way it is. But that's more to keep weeds. But in that, you'll have a low spot in your weed cloth. You have dust in the air, and you'll get a little bit of accumulation, and your seeds will germinate right above your weed cloth. So you just got to stay on it. So that's getting them in the ground. That's trying to figure out your watering. Water deeper, less frequently. Try and stay organic on the fertilizers. You'll get production, but you're heavier. Oftentimes when you see stuff that is 12, 12, 12, 20, 20, 20, that's a byproduct of the cracking plants. They can tell molecularly how to build nitrogen from the waste. Fluoride is a great example. if you're pulling it out of the ground and it's a byproduct of the aluminum plants, right? If they were to get rid of it, they'd have to pay for hazardous waste disposal. But they can sell it to the city to put in your water to keep your teeth from rotting. So figure that one out. But that's the kind of stuff that they make the fertilizer out of. So I have petrochemical stuff in my retirement portfolio. I'm from Texas. Oil's good, right? But it's not good in my peach trees. That's just all there is to it. So I want to talk a little bit about the brambles and stuff like that, and then I'll move into the actual stone fruits. These are really fun products. The bramble is going to be your raspberries, blackberries, anything thorny and bushy. In areas where it grows really crazy, you'll see the people that just take like the brush hogs and they just mow it down every few years, and then it just comes roaring back, and then the next year they're picking fruit again. There isn't any real reason to have old tines on this product. The rubus, which is the family, is in the rose family. And so you can kind of equate that rose hip, great source of vitamin C, to your berries here. Whatever it is, and I am going to intentionally not speak specifics because you'll take that and go, oh, Kevin said that this is how I should treat this plant. Every one of these species is a little bit different. Floratines and primatines. Your primatine is your first tine that comes up out of the ground. A floratine is a second year tine. And the species will tell you whether or not it's putting on fruit on floratine or primatine. And you want to take the tine down after it produces its fruit so that you'll get another one. The old stuff is just thorny. And if that's what you want as a hedge to keep people and critters out, then go ahead. But ideally, you get them vertical enough to where you can get to the fruit, and you pay attention to primatine. You find out what you got. Floratine, some of them will bloom 3 times. You can have primatine and floratine on the same plant at the same time. It's not; those terms are not species specific. Okay, but that's how you get your production best. If you take that old stuff out and let the new stuff come up, it's not a split. If you cut that guy off, and he'll just send out 2 or 3. If you got a healthy older plant, you'll really get a rigorous production out of your bramble, rubus, whatever you want to refer to them as. And oftentimes you'll see thorn less, and that truly is less thorns, not no thorns. So still handle the stuff with gloves. But your fertilization is the same. You're going to feed the roots when you put it in with some root and grow. You're going to get on a quarterly regimen of some good organic fertilizers. You're not going to put too much mulch in the hole. You can put mulch on top of these because you don't have a real stock. They like to come up through that, and they do like a winter blanket of mulch or leaf litter from the yard or whatever. That's really good for your bramble. But pay attention to what you've got, okay? They're hermaphrodite in the sense that they have male and female on the same plant. They will produce more if you have more plants, but one plant does not need a pollinator. Same with your blueberries. You can get great blueberries up here. This guy happens to be covered with them. Again, they don't need a cross-pollinator, but they like a cross-pollinator. They play well when they have friends, and again, when you're talking acid, I'll put my coffee grounds out. Well, that's great. If you can't tell, I have at least 1 pot of coffee myself. I have to get up. I have to make extra so my wife can have a couple of cups, and that's not enough grounds. If you're going to go to one of the coffee shops or something like that and get trash bags and use that on top of it, that's one of the few things you can almost plant directly into is spent coffee grounds. High nitrogen, which is a beautiful thing. and high acid. So anything can use that up here, but you got to really load it up to make a difference. A little bit at a time isn't going to hurt anything. I don't discourage you from it, but that's not your source of acid. Get some humic acid. Okay, that's how you bring that up. But give it a friend and give a different friend for your blueberry. The grapes. Great example of a primatime, right? You see them, they cut them all the way back every year because they put out a branch and they put fruit out. It's not second year, it's not the Florentine. Yes, sir.
Yeah, quite a few years back, we bought a thornless blackberry plant here, and it's done real well when it produces, and we cut it back every year and everything. But it's always had sour, they were bitter, they never were sweet. I don't know if that's the way they're supposed to be, or but it seemed like when we bought them, they said they would be sweet, but they're not sweet.
Up your calcium. There's a product that I have that I didn't bring up, and thank you for reminding me. Inside of our regular fertilizer, 744, that we developed a fruit and vegetable mix because what we were doing was we were selling people the 744 and then telling them, oh, buy the calcium nitrate because you have blossom end rot and a couple of other things that are truly just calcium deficiencies. And again, if you eat 12 eggs a week and you want to save the shells and put them in the blender and pour them around the plant, that's great. But that's next year because it takes that long for it to break down. So the calcium nitrate, when it breaks down, it puts out a lot of nitrogen. So you'll get a lot of new growth, but you will have sweeter carrots, you'll have sweeter berries with the extra calcium. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I forgot about that when I was prepping a couple of days ago for the show. But calcium is a great additive to the soil. But remember, and here's another point about your synthetic soil. So I bought a bag of potting mix or whatever that I was going to lay at the base of the plants because it's got soil, it's got fertilizer already in it. You know, it's 10, 10, 10, and it's a national product. And so I'm going to put it out there. Well, when you bring it in and you go, how come I've got this and how come I got that? It's really hard to say, well, give it more phosphate because it's already got 10 on phosphate and it's got 10 on nitrogen. You can get veggies, especially in vines, you can get them to grow too fast to forget to bloom, and that's too much nitrogen. Well, if you get impregnated soils, it's really hard to dial in the one that you need. So you use something that's kind of mellow, that's organic, so you get your microbial activity, you feed quarterly, and then when you need a shot, you can give them some nitrogen, or you can give them some phosphate in the fall. The grapes do great. Great example of a prima. You know, they cut them back. You can get them big. You can let them cover an arbor and stuff like that. And that's why you want to study the plant so that time that's not producing, that's the one you don't leave, right? You want to take that one off and it'll send off some others. And you keep those and then you start cutting them back. You can get them as big or as long as you want. They can cover a house or an arbor really easily. And you cut that back. You don't have to take everything back to the stock. It depends on that. But if you want to be able to walk underneath it and pick grapes or not so much for your raspberries and stuff like that because you want to cut those tines back. But you can get old fruit, old vine, old material, and then let those new ones come off of two particular plants. And that is your grapes and kiwi. And kiwi will do what it's supposed to do up here. So the key to it is you want to make sure when you look in the pot, the label will tell you. And I can only give you a little precursory pieces of information, but you got to read the label and then go and do homework and be careful about how to do things. What you want to know is just what the plant is and what you need to know about the plant. Kiwi needs a male and a female, and oftentimes they're going to have two different Latin names to that. But this particular grower puts them both in the same bucket. So if it doesn't look quite as full, look in there and make sure you got two plants in it and read the label. If you know your plant, then you can address it. The issue, if I have one, with finding stuff out on the DIY networks and stuff like that is some of the stuff is grown in Oregon or California, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and then brought here. So labels will read like you're going to be growing it there in a perfect growing environment. It's not going to get as big. you're not going to have the production unless you modify it a little bit to ours. That's what we're here for, because we can't change all the labels. We can just help you with the plant. Full sun in California is very different than full sun here, for example. It's not like the distance between us and the sun, 4,000 feet might not seem like much, but it is. The radiation difference. You don't have that dome of moisture in the air that refracts the light and stuff up here. You've got just pure sun. So wear your long sleeves. I'm not a real big fan of sunblock and stuff like that, but your plants will behave different. Full sun here is not the same. You might need partial shade for some of them. Yes, ma'am.
I have 3 blackberry bushes and 3 raspberries.
Uh-huh.
And they get, well, the blackberries do a little better than the raspberries, but the raspberries, it gets fruit on it and then it just kind of dry up. They get water every day.
There's your issue. I'm going to tell you right now.
Okay.
Don't water them every day. You're going to water them less frequently, deeper. But thank you for pointing that out. That's a perfect example. Yeah, you can do a layer of mulch on them. You can check the soil. Sometimes when you're getting grubs and stuff like that, the plant will look good, and then all of a sudden it'll go in a really fast decline. And the way that you can tell that is you only have to dig down 4 inches or so off to the side of the original root ball before you start to get to grubs, because they want this nice shallow fresh roots, and they like the moisture and they can't dig in dry soil.
How many
Right.
times a week do you recommend?
Probably once every 4 or 5 days. And it's really hard to say without somebody's got to really look at it. How much water's coming out? It's really hard to say, because the math is, if you have a valve on there or a drip head that says 5 gallons per hour, and you want 5 gallons on it at one time, well, you got to have it on for an hour. That 5 gallons doesn't equate to, it goes off every day for 15 minutes and I get 5 gallons a week. That's not the same, because now you're keeping this much moist, and you have these roots down here on the bottom that need water. And that's any kind of traumatic, like a couple of really hot days, and the plant is starting to tank. Then it rains and it gets it again, or it gets its water and it comes back, it gets the clouds and it looks good again. Well, that inconsistency is what damages your fruit. It's the fruit is the reproduction of the plant, and so you deep water less frequently.
On the blackberries and raspberry, how many gallons do you think they should get?
I couldn't begin to tell you. I have to see the plant. I got to know your dirt. You can't. Yeah, and if I give you an example, you'll take that home, and you won't do your homework, and you'll say that it's not. It may or may not work. So it's like picking up this and saying, you should put, a gallon of this per half a gallon of water. And then you'll go home and try and figure it out without reading the label. You gotta read it. Like this. Yeah. So gotta move into the fruit trees, because there's some really fun ways. That's how you trim these to get production. You got to take the dead wood out, and the grapes you can decide on the size. Your kiwi, you can pretty much let it grow however you want it to grow. If you've got a male and a female, your new growth is going to give you production. So, but inside of that, along that old tine, that Florentine, 2 or 3 year old stock, 5-year-old stock, you'll get little branches that will give you fruit. So that's grapes. The more you cut them, the more fruit you're going to get. Pomegranates are a little bit different. They're really pretty plant. They're kind of gnarly looking when they go naked in the winter. But there's nothing as pretty as those great big orange flowers and the fruit hanging on it. It's kind of like yellow variegated stuff. I don't really care for it. With the class, you get a little bit of opinion. So if you like pomegranates, there's a couple of them that grow really well up here. I'd rather have another peach or something else in my yard. So inside of your production. So I'm going to go specifically to your stone fruit. Your stone fruit's going to be even apples, but obviously cherries and peaches and that kind of product, right? read your cross pollination. Most of your peaches and your nectarines that we're going to bring in up here are going to be self-pollinators. And, but again, they play better with others. So it doesn't hurt to know what your neighbors have in their yard if you don't have room for, for 2 or 3 trees. If you just want a cherry, then get a self-pollinating cherry and drive around your neighborhood and see if anybody's got some. But there's a Lapin, there's a Montmorency, and a Stella that all grow well here, and they're all self-pollinating. So what I will do is I will plant one of those, and I will find one that I want, like a Rainier or a Bing or something like that, that will cross-pollinate with the one that I purchased, so that they will play well together, and I'll get more out of both of them. But the self-pollinator will give me fruit. Fruit trees, the stone fruit, are going to give you flowers and fruit off of new growth. So this year's new growth is next year's flowers. And you can take that into your pruning, so that the rule of thumb is cut for size in the summer. Well, if you're always thinking about how am I going to produce more new branches when I cut, then you're going to increase, like dramatically increase or decrease your fruit production by how you trim the tree and when you trim the tree. So when the tree goes naked, I will go in and I will take out what I perceive to be dead wood, or I will look at it and see where branches are rubbing up against each other. And I'll take out one or both of those so that that doesn't happen. But my trimming, I really want to do while it's alive so that I can get it to put out some more. If I'm going to raise the tree, which is taking me down, if I'm going to dramatically take product off of it, I'm either going to do it while it's completely naked or in the summertime. Having said all that, you see this is this green right here. This 2 feet is the new growth from being in a bucket at the nursery this year. All I've got is that. If I wanted that to be laden with fruit, then I would, this time of year, I would go up to the very top and I would just take out that much. And what that will do before the end of the summer, it'll put up little branches where the leaf nodes are. And each one of those little branches will be flowers in the spring. Do that too late, and you won't get those. You'll get them next year. Likewise, when this guy is full of fruit and he's hanging over, you're going to want to take off some of the fruit. The tree will let go of some fruit that it thinks it can't handle. And it can't handle it based on how it's being fed and how much water it's getting. It's just thinking, oh, I'm not going to be able to cover this, and it'll just drop a bunch of fruit. After that is when I thin my fruit, okay? Because I don't know that the tree hasn't already identified what I was going to pull off, or if it wants to keep the one that I was going to pull off. And I don't know how that works, but I let the tree decide first. And then if there's 3 or 4 together and I want bigger ones and I'm going to have a bunch, or I just want as many as I possibly can, then I leave it alone or whatever it is. Many of these trees eat really well. See how long and narrow that is and how supple this branch is? If you want see all these little bitty branches? That's going to be fruit. Those are going to be new flowers. And so you can. Espalier is the term where pears are very common, pears and apples. In Europe, they go flat and they'll do, just one direction, and they'll flatten them out along a fence or something like that. And these are plenty supple to be able to do that. Well, a really good time to do that is when this thing's laden with fruit and you think the branch might break. So instead of propping the branch up or taking a bunch of the fruit off of it so it doesn't weep, put a stake in the ground out here and tie this up with a old piece of hose or a piece of nylon line or something like that so it won't chafe the tree. Get your tree to be growing lower. Take the center out every once in a while And then you only need a step stool as opposed to a ladder to get to your fruit. When you see some of these trees, you will see where they've lopped off in our nursery. Again, this is maybe an 8-year-old tree. That's probably a 7-year-old tree. And you'll see a piece of duct tape, not duct tape, but paper, masking tape wrapped up around them. They cut that off because there's not so much light when they're growing them in a row, and they force these lower branches to come out. And the first one that comes up to take that leader's place, they put a little tape on it. That V is the weakest joint on a tree. Horizontal is some of the strongest joints on a tree. Those V's, when they start to get heavy, they'll tear, and you don't want it to split into the tree. So get it as high as you want it, and then keep cutting it, knowing that when you take the end of this off, all these little guys are going to come out, and that's where your fruit's going to be. So allow them to get as long as you want them to get. If you want to play with it a little bit, and this is the placement and the turning of them, if you're going to plant them in a row or offset in a little orchard, you can take a piece of bamboo and run it through the center of this and tie it down for a year. And put a little stake in the ground over here and hold it. You know that this foot is going in the ground. So this right here is about waist level. And it makes for a nice spread and more fruit production. At some point, you'll take the end of the branch off. I'm not in a hurry to do that. I want this to get as long and as low as possible. Now you're into critter protection and stuff like that. But let's say that your Labrador doesn't like the fruit, and he's not going to get up there and grab that. But you'll go into some of these older orchards that were set up for hand harvest and not mechanical harvest. And you'll see these horizontal branches that are like this, just covered with fruit. It's the coolest thing. And you don't have to, some of the trees will actually build little ladders into the tree because you only need to get so high. But they weren't into getting them big and fast and bringing the picking unit up there and just stripping the tree. So you keep them as low as you possibly can. But that's how you can do that. Don't be afraid to take your center out. And you got to be not intimidated to lose fruit because you're going to take fruit off. But you can pick that time. This guy's got a bunch of fruit on him and you want it. Well, just wait. Trim it, but trim it thinking of producing smaller branches later and trying to keep it low if that's what you want. People miss fruit trees for really simple things. What can I plant next to my greenhouse? It gets so darn hot in the summertime. Well, a peach will get 20 feet tall and it'll go completely naked in the winter and you'll get flowers and fruit off it. It's a pretty good shade tree if you let it go. And you can control the branches, you can control the shape of them. That's ways of thinking about it. This particular tree is a Santa Rosa plum, great producer and great pollinator for your other trees. It's self-fruiting, of course, and you'll, but if you're having trouble, to your point about getting stuff to come to bees to come to your space, there's two things. There's either, if the tree's in full bloom, the bees are cold or they've been hurt. You can get an early blooming tree and hope that it doesn't get caught by the frost, but that will attract the bees earlier if you want. They'll come out on a warm day and travel a couple of miles to get to some pollen. In reading your labels on these trees, you're going to see first whether or not they're self-pollinators, but you can also see whether or not they're stone fruit or cling fruit, okay? Or free stone or cling stone. And the cling is where you have to carve the meat off of the seed or rake your teeth across it. Or the free stone is where you just open it up and the stone is just kind of sitting in there. And I personally prefer that. If you see something, the Montmorency cherry is a great example. Sometimes referred to as tart cherry. Great for canning, it says. Well, it is, but it's sour. Great pollinator. But if you're not gonna bake or can, I want a cherry I can eat directly off the tree. So make sure that the description matches what your end use is. If it says canning or baking, it's probably not as good as a different peach to eat off the tree. And know that you're going to go in cycles where if you do everything right, you're going to have a few, you're going to have a few more, you're going to have a killer crop, and you're going to be trading them for zucchini with your neighbors, or you're going to have you're going to be canning. And then it mellows back out a little bit. You don't always get these monster crops. The point I'm making with that is make sure you're buying fruit that you like, so that when it comes in, it's not like, oh, that's the tree I didn't really want.
I have a sour cherry tree. I moved to this house about 6 years ago, and I didn't know what kind of cherry. Because it's sour every year, but I thought after what you said earlier, I was just going to add some calcium to it.
Well, you can.
Oh,
So she has a
I mean,
sour
if it's
cherry
supposed
tree.
to be- If it's supposed to be tart, I mean, will calcium help it?
No, it's not. It's only going to get so sweet. She has sour cherry. Her cherries are consistently sour, and it's an older tree. Sometimes you'll get smaller sour fruit on your first year or two, but if the tree has been there, you can add calcium and try and sweeten it up a little bit, get some acid in the soil, get your roots in good shape. But it might just be a Montmorency. The Montmorency cherry is what they use to make and flavor the acerola vitamin C tablets.
I think it's
That's
called,
what they taste like.
Montgomery.
Yeah, Montgomery or Montmorency. Yeah. Did you have a question, ma'am?
Yeah, I did actually. When you were talking about pruning the tops of the trees,
Uh-huh.
pruning them, is there a rule of thumb about like how, like, do you want to keep it shorter? I've always had to like work for some reason that you can't trim the main one to damage the health or something
No.
like that. Is that
So the question is about trimming the trees and how far down and can you hurt them? That you can cut the main stalk. The rule of thumb on arborist logic is not more than 20 to 25% of the leaves. And that because that's the production, the energy production. But just know that if you need to bring them down, then it's temporary. When I'd say 5, maybe 7 years ago, they decided that the insurance companies decided that they weren't going to insure non-citizens in California climbing up in avocado trees. And they said you can either set them up to be machine harvested or insure these guys. And so they took the trees, painted the bark, and brought them all down, cut them down to where you could get to everything. So you had 25-year-old avocado trees cut to 6, 7, 8 foot tall, and all at once. And the enamel is just to keep the bark from burning because it's been shaded. And then the next couple of years, they're putting out branches and producing fruit again that you can get to without having to get on a pickup truck. So no, you can cut it down. You're going to get stumped a little bit. You won't kill the tree. The issue here is this brings up a really good issue because as you damage the top of the tree, or if you damage the roots by chance, or you bump into the tree with your tractor or your weed eater, there's a graft, and the graft, what's below the graft, is not what is producing your fruit. It's a disease-resistant stalk, and if you have suckers, what we call them, if they come up from below the graft, you got to take them off because you're going to get whatever that root is. And I probably could do the homework and find out, but it's not going to be what you bought, and it will take energy away from what you bought. So take those off. There's a movement to go into this part of the country, specifically the state, to go into these old abandoned orchards, 100-year-old settlers, and try and identify the tree, or take all the dead wood out, feed them real good, get some healthy branches, take those off and graft them so that they can bring back some of these species that the settlers brought across the country. Really cool apples coming out of Sedona with that. But you have to just be careful about that. It's kind of like a rose, so they don't know what to call it. So it'll be Kevin's black apple, Kevin's Sedona black apple, because it came off my property, they don't. So look for that kind of stuff when you're getting into it. Some of this is hybridized, really pleasant for size. This is a dwarf nectarine. 10 minutes or what?
But yeah, about 5 minutes.
Okay, so this plant, the dwarfs that we get in, 9 foot is going to be a big tree by the time it's done. But it puts off the same size fruit as a regular tree. And they're just spectacular. Big, big bloom. And this is the one I have to build a cage around because my lab likes green peaches. So, one of the few I have a cage around. But again, you're watching your pruning. If it goes dormant, then you take a look at it. Everybody here is here because they're going to be paying attention to the trees. So one of the things you want to do too is if it goes into decline quick, go up and grab a hold of the stalk and rock it around. And if it's real loose, you might have something worse than grubs. You could have some rodents. And I went up and leaned against somebody's tree the other day and it literally just fell over. I was able to prove to them that it wasn't because of my superior strength or my girth. It was just a sick tree. But try these. They're really a lot of fun. They do well in great big pots. You can pull them out, cut the roots off after several years and stick it back in the pot. Real quick note. These are grown in 100% mulch. They're container grown trees. If you see them in burlap, then they're line grown and they're dug up. That mulch is going to do what it's supposed to do. In 3 to 5, 7 years, that's going to be decomposed. And you're going to want to come back behind that and add some sand and water that in with your quarterly fertilizer because you'll have air pockets underneath there. And you'll see odd things that you can't diagnose. And you always go to the roots first. And you get air pockets in there, you could get dry rot or just some harmful things that happen to the roots. And it happens on big aspen and big maples, real common. People bet you bring in a 15-gallon bucket of mulch and you stick it in the ground and it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's decomposing and washing away. And you got to come back and add some sand to fill in those spots. Read your labels. Make sure you're getting something that is self-producing or find out what it needs as a friend to produce. Check your seasons. When is it going to be ready? Is it mid-season? Is it early season? Is it late season? Depending on where you're at, you got all these cool little microclimates up here. And if you can get by with early that'll bring in the bees soon. Your mid will be starting to bloom as this fruit is setting. But the earlies oftentimes will catch that late frost, like the Mother's Day frost. You already got fruit. And then your late fruit will catch the early frost. You'll have green peaches and stuff, tomatoes on your vines, and you'll catch that early frost. So where I am right now, which is the backside of Yavapai Hills, I'm going medium on most of my stuff. And it'll tell you on the tab. And then the rest of the stuff, find out about that plant and find out when you need to cut it down. And you can mark them. What I'll do on my bramble and stuff, I will actually tie a little piece of ribbon on the one that's producing fruit. And I know I'm going to get one more bunch of fruit off of it. And because it's got a little ribbon on it, it keeps the birds off a little bit. But I'm taking that time to the ground, 4 inches or so off the ground. Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, we've had an apple tree for a long time, but we always get terrible worms in them all the time from the codling moths.
Yeah.
I don't generally like to spray poison around in the air because there are neighbors that have dogs and pets.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's another alternative to spraying poison on them.
Well, that's a great question. What kind of poisons are safe? Because we do need poisons sometimes. And when to do what? Thank you.
I can answer that because I have the same thing. And I learned from Ken or whoever. about the culling moth traps.
Yeah.
Well, for some reason, they're not available for the last couple of years. It started with the pandemic.
Yep.
So I tried a pantry moth trap, hung it in my tree, and it worked.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
You just have a trap for the moth itself.
Yeah, the moth flies in there, some kind of lure in there.
Yep.
Yeah,
You put the trap on the tree.
yeah, you hang it in the tree.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then, and you got to have it at the right time. It'll catch the fruit as soon as it turns to fruit from a flower. And it won't, the fruit is still edible, it's just nasty on the inside.
Yeah.
So quickly, the oils are used a lot for killing scale, and it's real important. You can get way ahead of your bug, killing your bugs in the fall and in the spring. They lay eggs, the thrip and a bunch of other scale. They lay eggs on the bark and in the bees and little convenient places that you can't see. So as soon as the tree goes naked, you can spray it with your dormant oils. Once it starts warming up, like this time of year, you don't really want to be using oils. They're in there for mold and fungus and stuff like that, but it's tough on the plant for the heat and the oil. But you spray, walk around the tree, get it dripping wet. That'll suffocate the larvae that are on the tree. And then right when the nodes start to swell in the spring, you can spray it again. And then you can use it, but once it starts getting hot, I just don't like to use it. And then your pyrethrin or permethrins they're synthesized, but they're organic structures that they're duplicating, and they have real short half-lives. And that's a contact killer for your bugs. So you want to spray those in the evening. You can, they're not going to get into the fruit, but you can wash it off your peach or your tomato and eat it. But you want to spray at night where they'll kill whatever's on there, and then the stuff starts breaking down. You got a real problem. You want to do it again in about 3 days, whether you think you got them or not. Yes, ma'am.
What was the name of that oil that you spray? What was the name?
Horticultural oil, neem oil, mineral oil, dormant oil. They'll use 3 or 4 different kinds of oil. Neem is caught on, but it's still oil. Yes.
I have my yard on the 4 times a year feeding, and I thought one class a few years ago, Ken said pull back on the fall one for fruit trees.
Okay.
But then the next time he talked, he didn't say that. But so anyway, I was thinking about that superphosphate. Can that be done by itself? Because you said the fall.
You can put it on anytime, but superphosphate, it's a root food and it's a flowering food. It's prescribed most frequently for ornamentals, but it causes them to overwinter well because you're feeding the roots and you get big flowers in the spring. But anything that the plant's picking up, it's organic enough. I wouldn't go real strong on something, but I wouldn't break my cycle because it's fall. People turn off their water in the winter to save their water lines from freezing, and you essentially freeze dry your plants because they need water and food in the winter. 2 feet of snow is not enough water to keep a shrub alive. So water them in the winter, just do it with the hose.
Do you need to worry about the snow weight on any of these long branches?
Sure you do, but it's more, if you have it staked, then it's less of a problem. So it's going to get a little, if it's perfectly still, you might get a little rim. If you have 2 or 3 of these laying down together, you might be problematic. But if you stake them, if you're spreading them out intentionally, and they're staked as we described, you won't have any problem. And they won't break when they're heavy with fruit, because the weight will go into the stake.
Newly planted fruit tree, does that need to save a little bit more water for a couple months, or just once every 5 or 7 days?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
If it's a newly planted tree,
Newly planted tree. does it need more water? Yes. And so instead of every 7 days, go every 5 days.
For a couple months? or-
Yeah, well, it depends on the time of year. If it's container grown, you can plant any time of the year up here. My favorite time is really now, because I like for them to get a little bit established before you go into winter. Spring is a great time to plant, but you might not get any fruit production, or if you do, I don't know if you want to keep it first year if you're planting in the spring. I want them in the ground during the winter, naked, waking up in my yard, as opposed to putting it off. But again, the best time to plant a tree is today as opposed to 10 years ago or tomorrow. You keep putting it off and you're just that far behind the curve. But if it's container grown, if it is in ball and burlap that's been dug up, the rule of thumb is they're supposed to be out of the ground for 6 months or so before they send them to us. And so they've gone through all that chop. Don't cut the burlap off. Just cut the rope that's around the stalk of the tree. And those you just have to be a little bit more careful about how much you water. Oftentimes they come in clay. And so you mix your soil a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
Since my trees were planted a year ago, how often should I use that root and grow and when?
I just, because you may not have before, just go out and give it a dose and just get it in the dirt. What I do is, and there's another small trick. When you're doing something like the root and grow, I actually kind of cheat a little bit. This is a chemical-based product, and I will put this in with my root and grow on the trees that have already established. Because this is my flower, this is 48 on phosphate, which is about as much as you can have in it, and it's still dissolved. 12 on nitrogen, 48, 8. I'll mix it with this with trees or shrubs that have already been in the ground for a period of time. I've got a established maple that's a little yellow in my yard. I give him a big old slug of nitrogen and phosphate, and I feed his roots before I decide whether or not I'm going to come back and do iron and all this other stuff.
How often do you do the root and grow for the established trees?
I do 2 applications, 2 weeks apart,
Okay.
and then I wait and
then
see what it
nothing
looks
the
like.
rest of you- okay.
Yep.
But they all look great and healthy, so.
Yeah, well, you're not going to do anything but hurt them, and you won't burn them. And then what I do this helps, a helpful tip, because you're trying to say, oh, how do I know if I get 5 gallons out of my hose if I don't carry a bucket around it? Pour this in a bucket, dissolve it with the hose next to the plant, so you don't have to carry a full bucket around, right? If I'm doing them at the spigot, I'm not filling it all the way up. I'll do, this is a scoop per gallon, so I'll do 3 heavy scoops, and I won't fill a 5-gallon bucket. I'm just not gonna do it. And but what I do is I count. So when I had a well, it was only a 12 count to fill up a 5-gallon bucket. When I'm in the city, it's more like a 40 count. So, but now I know when I'm standing there in front of my plant and I want to deep water them, I got to put 10 gallons on it. Well, that's 2 counts of 40. If my well fills up at 10, I know I got to go put something else on something and then come back and do it again, which is actually a really great method for watering. If you water it 3 times to get all the water you want on it, then you know you've hydrated the soil and you've gotten all the way down to the bottom of the hole. But it's 10 gallons a week is not 3.3 gallons 3 times. It's 10 gallons at one time, once a week. Once every 5 days, once every 7 days, depending on what the plant tells you it needs.
How long do you leave your fruit tree staked?
All right, any tree, 2 years. And oftentimes what I've done is I've come in when I bought a place and they want everything staked, and I don't know when it was really planted, but I can tell you those stakes are too old. I rock that stake out really carefully, twist it, it'll come out most of the time. It won't break it off, and then I put a little dirt in there, and I put my fertilizer in the hole. Now I'm feeding at root level. and then I backfill that with dirt, and I make sure I deep water it to start that dissolving. And then if I find a tree that has a prevailing wind that's suffering and still didn't get it right, or I'm planting new stuff in that yard, I'm actually using 5/8 inch rebar because I built furniture and I want to be able to use the steel later, and you can't see it. You'll be surprised how little you can see metal stakes, and not the fence stakes, just rebar. But you get an 8-foot piece and you put it 2 feet in the ground, and you tie your tree off, and as he rusts, he just kind of blends into the scenery. But 2 years. Yes, ma'am.
I have 3 red maple trees. One is doing fine. The other 2 are yellowish. Last year, you told me to use a lot of humic acid. They
Yep.
had a ton of humic acid. They had a ton of iron, and they're still yellowish.
Okay.
You said the root and grow and the
I have to see
flower
it. Just bring me a couple leaves. Because she's concerned about the yellow on, the acid didn't solve the issue on her maples. And so they're still yellow. Well, the lack of iron is green veins and yellow skin. So I usually, before I go with something as heavy as iron or some of the stronger chemicals, I try and do it with the acid or with a soil amendment and see if I can bring the tree back. Maybe it's just not balanced, it's not picking up what's already there, as opposed to going straight for iron. But that's what the leaf will look like if it's an iron deficiency. It's the green veins and the skin is yellow. But it's easier to see if I see it.
When are you going to be here? I can't come back today.
No, I now want to leave. So Wednesdays and Fridays is what I'm doing.
Wednesdays and Fridays?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll bring some leaves to you on Wednesday.
Anything else before I take off my apron and go home? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, my plum tree has, it looks like suckers. All the branches want to go up.
Yeah.
And every year I try to bring them down, but no more than a third. And when I do, then I got suckers coming up from the ground. But I can't force these. I can't force any new branches down low, which I want to, get the height off this thing. These things, and then less fruit.
Yeah.
So
Well,
is that too much water?
try finding a couple of these and bending them over and staking them. And you're going to have to just be diligent about the suckers. There is a product that we don't sell. It's called Sucker Punch. And it is to kill those suckers without killing the tree.
Okay.
Yes.
One other question.
No.
Going back to the raspberries and the blackberries,
Uh-huh.
they're on the same line as my strawberries and my tomatoes.
Uh-huh.
How frequently should the strawberries and tomatoes be
The
watered?
strawberries and tomatoes can be watered almost every day. That's part of it. When you build the place, you put in different balance. It's hard. Yeah. It's just going to be a study on strawberries can actually go drier than tomatoes. It depends on how big the tomato is and how deep the roots
The problem with the strawberries is if you get the leaves,
Yeah.
they turn brown.
are. No, you can't. You have to water underneath.
And that's,
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is.
okay.
That's the alkalinity of our soil doesn't jive with the foliage. That's why I say don't. If you're going to water, especially your veggies, you want to water underneath them. And then every once in a while, you flood the bed as opposed to just watering the plant. Get the whole thing wet.
Good lay of those there.
Yep. Yes, that's it.
It's rough when they.
No, time's up. Yes.
I just planted some berry bushes and I think I did it wrong and all the leaves are curling up and drying and I've lost all the fruitless and the blossoms. Should I trim all that back?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
it's okay?
Trim all that back. Maybe you think you made the whole too perfect.
I think it has too much.
Yeah. Get topsoil, which is mostly sand with just a little bit of mulch, and pour it around the base and water it in.
No,
and that
otherwise
sand
it-
will fill in the air pockets. that you put in.
But I can trim it back. Like,
No, what you're doing right now is you're in a survival mode. You want to make sure your roots are good for either fall production or spring. So, yeah. And your leaves, brown and crispy is too little, and brown and supple is too much water.
Yeah, but apricot tree that was really fine. Now the leaves are all dry and I didn't know if there's any chance of it.
Oh, it'll probably make it. I would just try that, get a piece of rebar and see what your watering looks like.
Yes,
And start with the assumption that it's a root issue. You're standing in water, it's not watering deep enough, and kind of back out from that. If the leaves are curling and they're still green, cut them up. They're not. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Just let it go. Just walk the water.
Yeah.
It's fine.
You bet. Phosphate in the fall. Yes.
I'm from Baldwin.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm with you. It's okay.
And there's a lot of clay and rocks, red clay.
Yeah.
And rocks. Do I use the same kind of base material to put plants and trees in?
Yeah, I still don't. The acid will help blow that apart better than a gypsum or sulfur soil. And you can work the soil by putting some mulch on top of it and throwing some acid on it and letting it sit for a season. And that'll start breaking it up for you.
Kevin, I got some pictures for you.
Butterfly bush, yes, sir.
Can you come look at the
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the information.
You want me